Let's talk some chess. This is a game from arguably the GOAT in chess history, Magnus Carlsen. It was played in 2005 in the Norwegian Championship. Makes sense because Magnus is from Norway. Magnus was about 13 or 14 at the time. He's playing with the white pieces against someone with the last name of Ostmoe, and Magnus opens with knight to f3. Ostmoe responds with knight to f6. Magnus plays c4. We have e6 and then d4. So getting these two nice pawns out near the center. And black responds with b6, preparing to fianchetto his bishop. Magnus responds similarly with g3. Black, instead of fianchettoing the bishop, actually brings the bishop to a6. I misspoke earlier. The nice part about this move is it develops a piece and attacks this undefended c4 pawn. Magnus protects the pawn with the simple b3. Black here really wants to break up this pawn structure, so he plays b5. Magnus is happy to make a trade, and now the bishop sits alone on b5. Magnus fianchettos his own bishop to f2, and here black pushes in the center with d5. Magnus castles kingside. That was pretty obvious. He was preparing this nice little cocoon for his king. The queen side obviously is now bereft of pawns and has a lot of pieces undeveloped, so it makes sense that he wants to tuck his king away on the king side, and black develops his knight and connects his two knights nicely with knight to d7. Magnus brings his knight to c3. This comes with an attack on the bishop on b5, so black dually retreats it to a6, and now Magnus puts his rook on e1. And this is a nice move because it achieves a couple of things. The light squared bishop is attacking this e2 pawn, currently only defended by the queen, so the queen cannot move away. The pawn is also sort of pinned, because if it moves, then the bishop will happily just make the exchange for the rook. So not only do you break the pin and add more protection to your pawn, but you also get your rook on the e-file, where it's x-raying the king and just will be very useful in the future attack. So a nice little move by Magnus here. Black puts his bishop on d6, and Magnus fianchettos his other bishop to b2, and now black castles kingside as well. So both players have completed development, both players are castled kingside, and now it'll be whoever can sort of fight and get their advantage in the center and hopefully win the game. Magnus starts with e4, and we have this beautiful symmetric position with two knights, two pawns, and two bishops. Oftentimes this doesn't work in chess, but it did here. Not to spoil the game, but it worked here. And you have to be careful as black, because you can't allow this e5 move. It would obviously fork the bishop and the knight. So black jumps right into it with knight takes on e4. Now we have a couple of trades on e4. Knight takes, pawn takes, and then we have this wonderful little rook lift made possible by the rook to e1 move. Now you get your rook on e4, and this rook is ready to roam. Not quite ready on the queen side, but ready to roam and join in the attack. Black does not like this rook on e4, so he puts his bishop on b7. Obviously this comes with an attack on the rook, and now the bishop is on the nice long diagonal. So Magnus swings his rook over to h4, and black continues to attack it with e7, brings the bishop to e7. The one issue with this move is we're going to see this bishop kind of get stuck on e7 for a big part of this game. So just remember this move. You don't remember too much, but just remember this move, trying to sort of dislodge this rook, and Magnus just happily tucks it away on h3 out of harm's way. Black brings his knight to f7, sensing some threats that we'll talk about in a moment, and before that threat materializes, Magnus develops his final, not his final piece, but Magnus develops his queen to e2. Black now puts his bishop on d5. Really nice square for the bishop because it can't be dislodged by any pawns, and now it's still still on this diagonal, but also has some action on this diagonal as well. And now Magnus shows the idea behind putting his queen on e2. He doubles up with the rook on e1, so he has this nice battery here, but don't be fooled. He'll be bringing them to the king side very soon. Black plays a bit of a weird-looking move, queen to b8. We're going to see the reason for it in a second. And Magnus takes advantage to jump into it with his knight, with knight to e5. So now this is a very good knight on e5. You're sort of threatening, if black ever moves his knight, you're threatening this fork on sorry, I keep misclicking. Threatening this fork on d7, forking the queen and the rook. So black immediately, gets rid of that concern, and also shows the reason for his queen to b8 move. Now you have queen to b7, and now you have a wonderful little battery on this long diagonal. And here black is threatening to take the bishop on g2 with no consequences, so white just makes the trade on d5. So now black has replaced his bishop on d5 with the queen on d5. It took a couple of moves to get there, but this is a nicely centralized queen that Magnus will have to worry about for the rest of the game. Here Magnus makes a sort of side swipe sideways queen move of his own with queen to c2, and now the threat is very obvious. If this knight ever moves, then Magnus will deliver a checkmate with the queen on h7. It's supported by the rook that is tucked away on h3. For now, the knight is defending this square, but black has to be careful to not get mated by moving that knight away. And here, this position is actually relatively equal. The computer is okay playing both sides, but here black makes a mistake and plays c5. Instead, black here needs to sort of preempt a bit of Magnus's attack with h6. You know, this obviously kind of cuts the rook off from h7, but instead black says, no, I'm fine, I have my knight protecting that, I'm just going to go ahead and play c5. But now the problem is that you allow this knight to g4 move. And this is a nice move for white because it opens up this file for the rook, which we'll see will be useful. It also attacks this black knight on f6, which is the only thing preventing mate at the moment on h7. So black really has to worry about this, and now black does play this h6 move. So now if white takes the knight, then this won't lead to checkmate because h7 is blocked by the pawn on h6. But it's actually too late now because this allows for Magnus's very nice rook lift to e5. So now 2 rook lifts on the e file, both really helped his position. This obviously comes with the tempo because it attacks the queen, and the rook is protected by the pawn. And the queen can't just take the pawn here because then you get Magnus will take back with bishop. So the queen moves to f3, which is not a bad square for the queen. It's in a very dangerous position for white. It has plenty of retreat squares it can move to. And again, Magnus will have to be careful about that. But now, let's say you're playing with the white pieces and you want to try to continue this attack. You have a couple of pieces in the vicinity of the black king, but you're not really sure how to continue. So take a moment and see if you can find the correct move here for Magnus. Okay, so hopefully you found the correct sacrifice. You do want to deliver check here, and there's actually only, well, the queen can technically deliver check, but this would be a crazy sacrifice. The correct sacrifice is taking with a knight on h6. And the idea here is that black pretty much has to take the knight back. If you move the king to the h file, you're just going to get a discovered check from the knight, and this is terrible, probably will lead to mate. So that's not what happened. Black took the knight on h6, and this allowed Magnus to take the pawn back on h6. And now you sacrifice the knight, but you've also eliminated the king's 2 best king's pawns, and now the king side is totally blown open, and you have this queen and the 2 rooks ready to attack and mate the king. So black now is in a lot of trouble. And black starts by playing a defensive move with king to g7, kind of forced to walk the king up the board here. This obviously attacks the undefended rook, but Magnus says, I have no interest in saving my rook. I want to pull the king out like poison, draw it out like poison, and play rook to g5. Only move here, all these squares are taken, so the king has to continue to walk up the board and take the rook on h6. So Magnus has just sacrificed a knight and a rook, and all he got out of it was these 2 king's pawns and getting the king up 2 ranks to the 6th rank. But as you'll see, it will be very, very worth it. Because here Magnus has this really sort of sneaky but powerful bishop to c1 move. The bishop is backward, all started on c1, and now it's x-raying the king, which sits on h6. Obviously, anywhere that you move the rook, if it's white's turn, you're going to get a really tough discovery check to deal with. And here black actually plays a surprising move, I think. Black takes on d4 and totally ignores this whole x-ray setup. But this is actually the recommended move by the engine, and the idea here is the king cannot move. All of these squares are taken away by white's pieces, and none of black's minor pieces can get in the way of this nasty bishop on c1. So you might as well just take the pawn, get this really nice passed pawn, and hope to get some counterplay that way. So Magnus, unsurprisingly, has a nice sidestep check here, all the way from c1. The rook moves to g4, and the bishop delivers this long-range check, and the only way to block this is with queen to e3. So now essentially black has given up his queen. Magnus can take it with the pawn or the bishop, probably the pawn, but Magnus doesn't do that just yet. Instead, he first plays rook to h4. So again, this h-file has just been excellent for Magnus's rooks. Clearing out these pawns really helped that attack. So here, black decides to block with the knight on h5. This is a reasonable move. It gets the knight more into the game, and finally, remember how I said that bishop was sort of hemmed in on the king side? Now the bishop is open and is attacking this rook on h4, so you know, hopefully getting some pieces closer to the white king, and although this queen is doomed. But you get the idea. Now the rook is attacked, and it's not entirely clear where to move it. And Magnus says, I know where to move it. I'm having a nice exchange sacrifice here and taking the knight on h5. So only real move is to take back, and now Magnus plays the what will prove to be devastating queen to h7 check. And now the queen is in behind the king. Again, Magnus sacrificed a ton of material just to walk the king off the board, but now you have the queen in behind the king, which is never a good idea, pushing the king towards these waiting pawns, and that usually doesn't work out for black. So here, black really, you know, the only move that makes sense is to bring the king to g4. If you bring it to g5, then you get bishop takes with tempo. If you want, there are probably better moves. Even taking with the pawn is probably better, and then you know, you're going to get a check here. But it didn't happen. Black played the king to g4, and Magnus finally takes the queen on e3. So now let's do a quick material count. Black actually is doing pretty well in terms of material. He has 2 rooks for a queen, which is better for black. The problem is that black's king is on g4, and that will make all the difference, as we will see. White's king is relatively safe right now, and black's king is not. So here, black plays a nice move. He plays rook to c8. This obviously comes with an attack on the bishop, and white has to be really careful here. So for the second time, and probably the last time, take a second and see if you can find a good move here for white. Okay, so the move that, well, let's just go through a move that looks good first. You might want to deliver check with the queen on g7. This obviously comes with a check on the king, and it looks like it works. But then the king has this escape hatch to f3. And now you don't have a check on the king. There's no, you know, clear way to check the king, and you have to worry about your bishop being attacked by the rook. So maybe you bring your bishop to d2, but then you get this, you know, d takes on e3, and now the bishop is attacked by the pawn. You have this passed pawn, and you have, in fact, this rook ready to deliver checkmate on e1. For example, if you move the bishop away, then this is actually checkmate because the king guards these squares. So you really have to be careful here. You don't want to deliver, you certainly don't want to deliver check with the queen on g7. You could make this bishop to d2 move. This is actually fine and preserves the advantage for white, but it's a little bit boring and not fun. And we know Magnus likes to have fun when he plays chess. So Magnus here goes for the very swaggy king to g2. And this is just awesome because it sacrifices the bishop on c1, which is exactly what black takes. But the whole idea here is that it allows for this h3 check. And the nice part about having the king on g2, you could have played this h3 check before. So let's say you play this h3 check, but then again, you have this escape valve to f3, and that doesn't work for Magnus. But when white's king is on g2 and you play h3 check, the king has no options except to go to g5. And now you're going to get checkmate in just a couple of moves because you have all these squares sort of hemmed off by the pawns, and then the queen is going to help press the king into the rocks and deliver a finishing mate. So first we have queen to g7, so you just had to wait to play that queen to g7 check, but now it works much better. King, if you go to h5, then you're going to get g4, king has to move to h4, and then queen to h6 is checkmate. So you can't go to the h file, so instead black brings his king to f5, but then we get g4, really nice check by the pawn. King has to go to e4 into the center of the field, as it were, and Magnus finishes the game with a wonderful queen to d4 checkmate. Queen is obviously checking the king, taking away these squares, and protected by the pawn. This square, this f4 square is really nicely taken by Magnus's z-pawn, and then the f5 square is taken by Magnus's g-pawn. And finally, Magnus's really swaggy g2 king move is important because it takes away the f3 square for the black king. So just a really fun attack. Magnus sacrificed a ton of material to get the black king to walk up the board, and was able to deliver a fun checkmate with the queen. And here white is down a ton of material. You have a queen and you're versus 2 rooks and a bishop, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is that the black king is on e4 and checkmate has been delivered. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.